I hope you have been meditating in the right way. And at least I notice that some of you have understood that this method of meditation is different from the other methods of meditation. This is really the difference between the teachings of the Buddha and the modern day teachings about the Dhamma and also about meditation. So we are not teaching concentration meditation. We are teaching purification of the mind. And when we think of purifying the mind, it is very important to understand that we have two kinds of minds. One is the thinking mind, and the other is the emotional mind. The Buddha used two words to refer to these two kinds of minds: mano and chitta. Mano refers to the thinking mind, and chitta refers to the emotional. Now, normally in English language, people use two words to refer to this. The thinking mind is called the head, and the emotional mind is called the heart. So there is a connection between these words, because the thinking part is done by the brain, which is in the head. And the emotions are connected with the blood, because the emotions are due to a mixture of the hormones with the blood, and changes take place in the activities of the body. So the emotion is more physical than mental, although we regard the emotion also as mental. So anyway, it doesn't matter. We should understand that these emotions are not a good thing. It is a disturbance of the whole body. Not only a disturbance of the mind, it is a disturbance of the body. And that is what we call today, we call stress. Stress. Today people spend money to learn stress management. But the Buddha has explained this in more detail and even in a better way than what the modern psychologists are aware of. So the entire practice of Buddhism is based on how to keep a calm mind, undisturbed by the changing vicissitudes of life. Now, today, our friend Billy Tang will try to explain to you in pictures how the mind is disturbed by these emotions. So you can start.
Okay. Good evening, brothers and sisters. Very happy to have this opportunity. Thank you, Bhante, for this opportunity. And with Bhante's permission, I shall proceed. Before I begin with stress, I would like to highlight one very important thing to do with the exercises we do in the morning. That has to do with the breathing that Bhante has been teaching us. So I'll just very quickly show you a couple of very important clips so you can understand what is diaphragmatic breathing. Diaphragmatic breathing is, in fact, the most critically overlooked relaxation tool. It actually relaxes the mind very quickly if you use it properly under the proper circumstances. So with a little bit of training and practice, you are able to use that. And what does it do for you? Right? It calms the mind and relaxes the body. It increases the natural oxygen intake because oxygen is food for your cells. It stabilizes your heart rate and blood pressure so that you are able to then feel more at ease and comfortable. It regulates your body temperature and blood circulation and restores and maintains your homeostasis. Homeostasis is basically referring to the condition of stability in your body. If that is not stable, then you will be feeling a lot of discomfort and you may even become sick. All right? And it calms the amygdala. I'm going to talk a little bit about the amygdala later on. The amygdala is a part of your brain which is easily aroused. It evolved over millions of years to help protect us from danger. But it can also be aroused by the slightest sensation. When it is aroused unnecessarily, it can cause stress in your body. Right? And therefore, diaphragmatic breathing helps to calm the amygdala by indicating to the amygdala the fact that you're able to do the diaphragmatic breathing, there is no danger, that your whole body is under a condition where it is safe and secure. So amygdala does not unnecessarily get aroused. This is a picture of the diaphragm. The diaphragm is a curved thing which is separating your lungs from your bowel system, your stomach. And in the normal rested position, it is curved. Diaphragmatic breathing basically flattens it out so that it pulls down the lung and expands the lung capacity and absorbs the air by relaxing and flattening out this muscle. In fact, the effort to flatten this muscle is a lot less than the energy you're going to use by trying to push up your lungs to take in more air. So diaphragmatic breathing actually uses less energy. So what you see here, most people who never practice diaphragmatic breathing or deep breathing, they are the ones in the middle, number 2, lazy breathing. In lazy breathing, the diaphragm remains always in that position, and that's not good. After a prolonged period, it would be very difficult for people to exercise the diaphragm because it becomes so stiff in that position. Whereas normal breathing with a support, it tends to flatten out a little bit, and that's on the left. But if you actually practice diaphragmatic breathing, that will be on the right, where it completely flattens out and then curves back. Flattens out and curves back. And then you can draw in more oxygen. So we'll let the expert explain this to you.
In this diagram, you can see that for the individual on the left, the diaphragm is shaped like a shepherd's crook, and it is nicely rounded. For the individual in the middle, who is characteristic of lazy or shallow breathing, that person has pulled in the mid-torso region, sucked it in, and lifted up the chest and the shoulders. You will notice the diaphragm now has arched up, actually pulled up into that hook. The individual on the right, however, is breathing properly, breathing with support, and you will notice that here the diaphragm is actually pushed down. It is expanded out. Look at the difference in the lung capacity between the individual on the right with supported breathing and the individual in the middle with shallow or lazy breathing.
The energy it takes to accomplish diaphragmatic breathing is actually less than the energy you would need in order to try to expand your chest upwards. So exercising diaphragmatic breathing helps you draw in more oxygen with less effort. Okay, I'll just begin with this evening's presentation, from perception to stress. Basically talking about how the process of perception, that is what we see, hear, smell, taste and touch, it triggers a process where it forms a perception in the head, and this is called the process of perception. This is going on continuously, millions and millions of times every second. You can't stop it. It is continuously happening. So this process of perception is continuously forming images in your head. Whether you're awake or you're asleep, the only time it doesn't form any image is when you are dead. So this is how process of perception arises from environmental stimulations leading to emotional reaction. We begin to react to these sensations, because everything we see, hear, smell, taste and touch gives rise to sensations, and these sensations are either pleasant, unpleasant or neutral. Whether it is pleasant, unpleasant or neutral, we begin to react to it. In the case of pleasant, we want more of it because it feels good. We want to go for more of it. Going for more of it is basically called lobha. And when it is unpleasant, we want to get rid of it. We hate it, and that is dosa. And when it is neutral, we begin to have this notion that there is something out there. There is this being that I am the being that is experiencing something out there. It's the notion or the delusion of existence. And that is moha. So these are the reactions, and therefore they lead to stress and insecurity. So basically it is the tanha, our reactions, that lead to our suffering. Stress and insecurity. And we're going to touch on a little bit about how we can reduce the harmful effects of stress. So very quickly, we're going to cover how environmental activities stimulate our sense organs, giving rise to the process of perception. And the mind begins to interpret these perceptions, leading to unconscious emotional arousal. And the emotional mind also reacts to these sensations. And the reaction becomes stressful and causes insecurity. And finally, very quickly, how to reduce these effects. So very often we ask ourselves, we have to begin at this point in time. I think it's a good way to begin, to ask ourselves the question, who am I? Very often people give a name, oh, I am so and so, and this is the name given to you. But is that you? So if we really think deeply into this issue, who am I? And basically, I am an organism in an environment. Plants are organisms, animals are organisms, every human being that is alive is an organism, and therefore we are all organisms in an environment, thriving, surviving, and also struggling in this environment. As a human being, there are two things happening to us that is beyond our control. We can't control them. It is continuously happening. And because it is continuously happening, it gives us the notion that we are alive, we are a self, there is a self to speak of. So the first thing is metabolism. Metabolism is the life-sustaining process that keeps the body alive. When you are alive, metabolism is working well in you. When metabolism stops completely, then you are dead. The second process is basically our sense organs are continuously experiencing the environment. Whether we are awake or whether we are asleep, it is continuously sensing the environment. And with these sensations, we begin to experience the environment. We are able to see, hear, smell, taste, and touch. And with these, we begin to have consciousness. A sense of consciousness of a self in the world, that we exist in this world. Okay, so basically these are the two things happening that we have no control over. We can't control these two things that's happening. So the environment is continuously stimulating our sense organs and giving rise to process of perception continuously, perpetually. How do we deal with it? How does the body deal with it? The body deals with it through the central nervous system. If we speak of the body, then the body deals with these through the central nervous system, which is made of two parts, the brain and spinal cord. The spinal cord is connected to the peripheral nervous system, and the peripheral nervous system is connected to our sense organs. Our eyeball, in order for us to sense anything, there is light sensitive cells at the back where the retina is, and these are optical nerves. These light sensitive cells are connected to the peripheral nervous system, which is in turn connected to the spinal cord. The same with our hearing, our touch, our smelling, and our tasting. They are all sense organs with nerves that are sensitive to certain chemicals, certain light or certain vibration, causing that signal to be transmitted through the spinal cord. And where does it go? All this signal gets sent to the brain. And then the brain processes it automatically. The brain cannot control these signals. The brain can only just process it. And it is the brain processing this signal which is the activity that gives rise to the mind. So there is an activity of the brain that we call the mind. The mind is not an entity. The mind is not the brain. Because if we ask people, where is your mind? Where would you point it? Almost everybody would say the mind is up here. Some might point to the whole body. Actually, pointing to the whole body is more accurate. Because the process of the mind is not just only what is inside the brain. All the nerves, they are also giving rise to the process of the mind. So basically, the brain processes information, and in this processing, the activity of the brain is the mind. The brain itself, let's just take a look at the organ of the brain. The brain is evolved over millions of years in the human being into three parts. The most primitive part, connected to the spinal cord, is the brain stem. This is the part that keeps us alive. That's why it's called the surviving brain. This is the part of the brain that governs our heart rate, our blood pressure, our body temperature, right, and our respiratory system. They govern these parts of these systems in the body autonomously. That means we have no control over it. It's continuously governing that. And it is all these activities that are giving rise to this, the life that we have. We are alive because of all these activities. We're able to breathe, and the brains are able to divide, the cells are able to divide and multiply, and then we are alive. That is that is basically the whole process of metabolism. And then as time went by, the brain evolved further. The second part of the brain is the limbic system. The limbic system is commonly called the emotional brain, because this is the part of the brain that contains several tissues and several structures that actually cause emotions. These are the structures which actually help define emotions. In the past, psychologists and philosophers always thought emotion was something purely mental. But actually, the smarter philosophers and smarter psychologists, they realize that emotion is not mental. But today, because of brain science or neuroscience, it has become very clear that emotion is no longer purely mental. It is proven now. Emotion is a combination of mental as well as physiological, because of the hormones and the chemicals, the enzymes, the neurotransmitters, the acids, that is all being released, the biochemical reactions in the body that is flooding the bloodstream. So the combination of these biochemical reactions as well as our mind, our mental processes, they make up emotion. So emotion is not just purely mental. And the part that is not mental, the part that is very much biochemical and physiological, is controlled by the limbic system. And then as time went by, the brain evolved further in the human species. And this is only found in human beings as well as in selected species of high-level mammals like dolphins and chimpanzees. The outermost brain evolved. That is called the cerebral cortex. But in the human being, this is very advanced compared to the other species. This is much, much thicker compared to the other species. Compared to a chimpanzee, this itself is about 5 to 8 times compared to the cerebral cortex inside the chimpanzees. Okay? So this cerebral cortex is what we call the learning brain, the ability to learn from the environment. Because of the advanced evolution, or what we see as relatively the advanced evolution of this cerebral cortex, we are smarter than the other animals, all the other species, including chimpanzees and dolphins. But actually all that is still in the process of evolving, and we'll see that in a moment. So the third part of the brain is the thinking part. And this is the most important part, because this is the part that governs your happiness or your suffering. If you're not able to manage your thinking brain, you are more likely to suffer more than be happy. Okay? So we're going to look into this whole process. So let's take a look at the emotional brain first. A very important part in the emotional brain we have to understand. Buried deep inside the emotional brain is a small little structure which is the size of your thumbnail, basically. And this small little structure is called the amygdala. It's very important to understand this, because if you want to understand stress, if you want to understand how to manage stress, then you have to understand there is this thing called the amygdala. You don't have to be a brain scientist to understand how it works. You just have to understand what it does. So what does it do? It scans environmental inputs, scans your bodily sensations, scan all the environmental sensations, such as what you see, hear, smell, taste, and touch, and looking for what? Looking for signs of potential threats and danger to the organism. When it senses something it suspects could be threat or danger to the organism, it triggers a chain reaction. And this chain reaction is what causes discomfort, frustration, anxiety, anger, fear, panic, and so on. This chain reaction is called the fight, flight, or freeze reaction. And this reaction is commonly called stress reaction, which is causing the discomfort in the body. This can be triggered by real danger, but it can also be triggered by the most innocent thing. What is a real danger? If we talk about humans having evolved over millions of years, real danger is the appearance of let's say a saber-toothed tiger in ancient times. We talk about primitive days where cavemen, where ancient men living in caves, walking down the jungle path, they hear a loud sound and then a saber-toothed tiger jumps out. That is a real danger. So that loud roar of the saber-toothed tiger became identified as danger. And over time, anything that sounded very loud became a danger to the organism. The amygdala gets aroused by very loud sound. You can recall in your own experience, if you're sitting there quietly, suddenly somebody sets off the firework, you get a little bit spooked, your whole body reacts. Guess what? That reaction in your body, without thinking, is reaction of the amygdala, causing the body to react in this manner. So that is what happens. The amygdala senses it. Therefore, the amygdala has a paradoxical role. Two roles that seem to do the opposite. The first role is it is a bodyguard. It protects the organisms from harm. It serves to protect you from threat and danger by sensing these dangerous signals and reacting to save your life. For example, you're walking down the street. Suddenly a car comes towards you, or a very fast approaching object coming towards you very quickly. Through the corner of your eye, you may notice it, but you don't know what it is. Without knowing what it is, your whole body reacts and jumps out of the way. How is that so? That is not because you saw what it is. It could be a car coming towards you and you jump out of the way, so your life has been spared. It could also be your friend who happened to be jogging nearby and saw you and ran towards you. And in that abrupt moment, you jumped out of the way, even if it was a friend approaching you. So therefore, the amygdala serves as a bodyguard to help protect the organism. But at the same time, the amygdala can be unnecessarily aroused by various environmental sensations, right? You can sense something, like you hear the loud sound of somebody whose voice happens to be very loud. I'm sure all of us have friends who have very loud voices and they speak very loudly. So if you happen to be sitting at your desk doing your work and this colleague comes from behind and you didn't realize, and then he suddenly spoke to you with a loud voice, oh, like that, and then you suddenly get spooked. You see, that is the amygdala at work. So therefore, the amygdala can also be aroused by false signal, false alarm. Yeah, and it is this false alarm arousal which is actually very unhealthy to our body. We easily allow ourselves, because of this evolutionary process where the amygdala has been trained to be aroused by these things, we are easily aroused by loud sound, by heat. That means we touch something that is hot or very cold, extreme heat, extreme coldness. We touch something which is to have a lot of movement, something that vibrates a lot. Yeah, or we see fast approaching objects. All these arouse the amygdala. Okay, and that is how stress easily arises unconsciously. There is a way to overcome all that through training our learning brain, through our overall learning brain, which is made of 4 lobes. Our brain has 2 hemispheres, and in these 2 hemispheres there are 4 sets of lobes. In the front is the frontal lobe. Okay, so the frontal lobe, and then on the top, over the top, is the parietal lobe. On the side, behind and above the ear is the temporal lobe. And finally, behind the head, that is the occipital lobe. All these different lobes have different functions. But the most important of all these 4 lobes is your frontal lobe. What does the frontal lobe do? The frontal lobe is responsible for attention system, long-term memory, logic, critical thinking. That means being rational, able to think rationally. Lateral thinking, which means creativity and imagination. Decision making, goal setting, planning, judgment, reasoning, and rationalizing. And these are all the functions of the frontal lobe, which is the part of your brain just behind your forehead. Just a simple little advice to all the mothers and fathers. Don't allow your children to play games that knock this part of the forehead. Definitely no sepak takraw. Okay? Because when there's too much vibration, it can harm the development of your frontal lobe. And there are two sets of functions specifically that are very special. Decision making, goal setting, planning, judgment, reasoning, rationalizing. All this is happening in a very small part of the frontal lobe, and that is that little bit just behind the eyebrow, just underneath the frontal lobe. It's called the prefrontal cortex, PFC in short. So the prefrontal cortex is that little part of the brain that is responsible for decision making, goal setting, planning, judgment, reasoning, and rationalizing. When you meditate, scientists have already proven beyond doubt, when you meditate, meditation helps to reinforce the functioning of this prefrontal cortex, which means it enhances the performance of your prefrontal cortex. So meditation, the Buddhist meditation I'm referring to, the Buddhist meditation serves the purpose of enhancing your prefrontal cortex. Okay? And these are the functions that it helps to enhance. Your ability to make decisions wisely, your ability to set wholesome goals and plan your actions, your ability to form good judgment, reasoning and rationalizing. These are the important brain functions that are being reinforced when you meditate. And scientists have proven that in Buddhist meditation, it is reinforcing the prefrontal cortex. I can't say much for other forms of meditation. There are many forms of meditation. Some of them do not do much to the prefrontal cortex. One of them, which has become very popular in America, is called transcendental meditation. That does almost nothing to your prefrontal cortex. Transcendental meditation serves the purpose of helping you relieve yourself from depression and emotional hang-ups, but it does not reinforce the functioning of the prefrontal cortex. So the Buddhist meditation has been proven to do that, and this is being proved by a lot of well-known brain scientists. So what is in the mind? What is a mental experience then? A mental experience is made of three parts. There are three parts to all mental experiences. The first part is called vijnana, the perception that arises from stimulation of the environment. This is the arising of perception because of stimulation from environment. The second part, as Bhante has mentioned, is mano, the thinking mind, the cognitive process, the rational process, which interprets the perception and gives meaning to perception based on your past experiences. It is logical or rational in this sense. And the third mind is the citta. This is the affective process, which is the arousal of emotions leading to mental proliferation. That means your mind begins to wander off into your memory of past experiences, or your imagination of a future that has not yet happened, or the expectation demanding for changes in the present moment. So imagination, memory, expectation, that is mental proliferation. And it also makes you personalize your experience, the experience of the body, And this personalization of the experience of the body, we begin to point to in the mind and say, oh, this body is me. This body is mine. This body is I. So the notion of a self arises because of this personalization of the experience. So that's how the notion of self arises, because of the personalization of our experience, the experience of the body. So let's take a look at how it all works. We have the environment stimulating our sense organs, and this stimulation of sense organs gives rise to the process of perception, panchakanda, which is made of 5 constituents. These are the 5 constituents of the process of perception. I'm not going to go into these in detail today. I will probably do this on Thursday or Friday. We will go into Panchakanda in more detail. But we'll just suffice to say, because of the process of perception that arises, we begin to have a perception of what we have seen, heard, smelled, tasted, or touched. So our sense organ brought in this information, and then the mind has a mental image of what we have just seen, heard, smelled, taste, and touch. So that is called perception. It arises. And then the cognitive process processes this perception and interprets the perception by giving meaning to it. And this process is recognition. So basically, you recognize something or someone because you have seen or known that person before. So this is the cognitive process, mano. There is also the arising of the affective process, which arises unconsciously, called chitta. The affective process basically is arising to trigger off your affection, your mood, and your temperament. So these are the 3 processes that make up the process of the mind: vijnana, mano, and chitta. When these arise, you have an intention to want to do something. That intention is cetana, and the action you take, the action of the body, that is karma. So when you have intention to do something and you carry out that action, then you have your cetana and your karma. And when you do something, it produces some consequence. Every action has a consequence. Every action causes something to happen or leads to something to happen. Your actions become the conditions for something to happen. And that consequence is called the vipaka. Basically, this is the process of experience. From the moment our sense organ is stimulated with the arising of the process of perception, leading to our interpretation with the cognitive process, as well as our unconscious emotional reaction with the affective process, we form intentions and carry out actions, and they cause consequences to us internally and to the environment externally. So if we take a look at this process of experience from another perspective, we can say the process of experience is a chain reaction. Environmental stimulus stimulate the process of perception, giving rise to our ability to see, hear, smell, taste, and touch, and then forming perception. The mano, which is the cognitive process, tries to interpret these perceptions by referring to memory of past experiences. This process of referring to memory of past experiences is called papancha. Okay, there are many names given by scientists. Psychologists call it schema. There are other branches of psychology which leads to the development of neuro-linguistic programming. They call it the transderivational search, which means we search a memory in order to find something to be able to interpret what we have just perceived. And then unconscious process of emotion begins to arise. Initially, this is the mental part of the emotion, the chitta. It arises, and when chitta arises, it actually triggers off biochemical chain reaction in the body. This biochemical chain reaction is the release of hormones, enzymes, neurotransmitters, acids, and various chemicals in the body, in various parts of the body. And they begin to form tension in the body. This tension in the body is a kind of stressor. Stressor means the condition that gives rise to stress. So tension in the body is the condition that leads to stress. And stress is the feeling that we feel, this discomfort. This discomfort is bodily sensation that is then being sensed again by the mind. That we have a certain bodily sensation making us feel uncomfortable, making us feel pain, making us feel frustrated and anxious, right? So this process of biochemical chain reaction, this stress reaction, leads to the release of two very powerful hormones, adrenaline and cortisol. They serve different purposes, various functions. Right? There's no need to really segregate between two. I will just show you this other diagram, which is easier to see. We call this the fight or flight reaction. How the body reacts to threats. And this reaction is the stress reaction. First, when the brain senses environmental threat, the amygdala begins to send out messages throughout the brain. And then the brain begins to send message to various parts of the body. So the brain sends message to the glands, for instance. In this case, there is a gland, there are two glands above the two kidneys. We have two kidneys on the two sides of our body, and directly above the kidney would be the adrenal gland. The message is sent to the adrenal gland. The adrenal gland releases the two hormones, adrenaline and cortisol. First the adrenaline, followed by the cortisol, and they flood the bloodstream. They go into the bloodstream, they get carried to various parts of the body, to various organs in the whole body. And when these organs sense the arrival of these hormones, they begin to react in their own special ways. For instance, the heart begins to beat faster. Blood pressure rises. And all this is to help increase your blood circulation. You need to circulate the blood faster because you need to carry oxygen, you need to carry energy to different parts of the body so that your body can react to the danger. So this increase in blood pressure and heart rate is to help circulate the blood so that your body can react to danger. Your respiration system reacts very rapidly. So respiration deepens, and this is to help increase the intake of oxygen. You need oxygen to feed energy to the cells. So therefore, the increased intake of oxygen is to help your body to prepare to react to these threatening situation or what it thinks to be threatening. And your intestinal movements has to be stopped. The cortisol releases and suspends your intestinal movement. That means your digestive system. Because after you've taken food, your digestive system draws a lot of energy from your body. And this energy will make your whole body very lethargic. You will know that straight after a heavy lunch, straight after a heavy dinner, your whole body feels like it wants to just relax. Because a lot of energy is being drawn by your digestive system. Now, if you are in that condition, you are not ready to react to danger. Cortisol is released to suspend that so that you now can conserve the energy to react to the threat. And what are some of the reactions? Adrenaline causes your muscle to tense up, getting ready to fight. That means to resist, right, to counter-attack whatever the threat is, or to run away, right? So it's getting ready to fight or run away, fight or flight. That's how your muscles get tensed up, ready to do that. And hair stands on end because when your brain senses danger, one of the things it does is causes a reaction in your body to make you look bigger. In ancient times, right, if you look at how animals have evolved, you can see that these cats and dogs and apes and gorillas that have very long hair, the hair stands on end, makes the animal look bigger to frighten off the predator. And the same reaction is in human being also. We are no different from other animals in that respect, because we are animals also. So the hair stands on end, but some of you will feel it because you can feel goosebumps. That is your hair standing on end. And then your pupils dilate, open up to take in more light so that it can enhance your vision. You're able to see more clearly. And your facial expression becomes distorted, right? Distorted is just one of the evolutionary reaction to help you make it tougher so that you frighten away your predator, right? You can see in all animals, when they are being threatened, they make themselves look very fierce, right? The dogs, the cats, all animals, they make themselves look very fierce. So even the humans will do that. Your facial expression distorts. You have to be careful, because if you are stressed too often, distortion of facial expression can cause a lot of various parts of your face to have all kinds of wrinkles. Some people call this railway tracks on your face. And you can see these railway tracks in females, but the guys don't laugh because males have it too. Okay? And then your body begins to perspire, and in some cases you may even sense trembling. Your body temperature rises, your body is trembling, and blood sugar level rises to help in this metabolism. And finally, your body immune system is suspended. Because if your body immune system is not suspended, it is trying to recover from this situation. So cortisol is so powerful that it suspends your body immune system. Now take a look at what has just happened. If you allow yourself to be stressed frequently and you don't learn how to relax and calm your mind and relax your body, it is so unhealthy. If your body immune system is suspended, you can catch disease very easily. You become susceptible to bacteria in the environment. Your blood sugar rises, what happens? You become diabetic. If you have too much perspiration and trembling, your body temperature rises, your body becomes unstable. Your homeostasis condition is out of whack. Okay? And if your pupils dilate too much, your vision will be affected because your vision will be weakened over time. Hair stands on end. If it happens too often, sooner or later there's no more hair to stand on end. Your hair will fall off. Okay. Muscles tense up. What does it do? It causes various tension in the body. It causes stiffness in the body. It makes you feel backache, neck ache, shoulder ache. Your hands are aching. Various parts of your body are aching. That is because of the muscular condition. Intestinal movement ceases. What happens? What happened to all the juice and the acids that comes out to help you digest your food? They flood your bowel system. Now if you happen to have ulcers, it worsens your ulcer condition. Ulcers are caused by bacteria, but the intestinal juices can worsen the ulcer. As your respiration deepens, you can hyperventilate. You begin to do this kind of thing, and then people will begin to have these asthmatic conditions. So that is also not good. Your heart beating faster. Well, we all know that scientists have basically declared that the human heart can only beat so many billion times in a lifetime. What happens to your life if your heart beats faster often? Shorten. You live a shorter life. Okay. It also causes blood pressure to rise. What happens? You become hypertension. You get hypertension, right? So your blood pressure rises. So all these are very unhealthy to your body. So let's take a look at this 5 or flight reaction.
Fear is so important for our survival, we do something absolutely remarkable. Our bodies begin to react to a threat before we're even consciously aware of what the threat might be. Because when we're faced with danger, milliseconds count. At the first hint of danger, early warning signals are sent to the brain via the optic nerve to our tiny and primitive fear center, the amygdala. This prepares our body for action. Next, nerve pulses are fired down the spinal cord to the adrenal glands near our kidneys. This triggers a release of adrenaline. Now we're on full alert. Adrenaline is the vital hormone that can flood our body in a split second. As it reaches our lungs, we breathe more deeply and take in more oxygen. It also makes our heart beat faster. Oxygen-rich blood is diverted to our muscles. They are now charged springs, waiting for the signal to run or fight. All this before our conscious mind has even registered a threat. This reaction to fear has evolved over millions of years and is known as the fight or flight response.
This reaction has evolved over millions of years. The fight or flight reaction, it is unconscious, it is triggered by the amygdala when the amygdala is aroused. So if we look at this process of experience again, environmental stimulus stimulate our sense organ, we have a perception, we interpret the perception, and our emotional mind arises, the chitta, unconsciously trigger this biochemical chain reaction, causing bodily sensations. Then what happens? We begin to have mental proliferation. The memory, imagination, expectation arises. If it is a pleasant sensation, we want more of it, and that is lobha. If it is something that is unpleasant or painful, we want to get rid of it, and that is dosa. If it is something that is neutral, we begin to have this notion that there is something out there, then there is the self in here, I have a self in the world, I exist. So the delusion of existence, the notion of existence. So basically that is lobha, dosa, and moha. Now the lobha and dosa, moha, they actually disturb the rational mind. They disturb your cognitive process. You are not able to think rationally when you are triggered by these sensual pleasures or sensual pain. Whether you are experiencing pleasures or pain, you will not be able to think rationally. Okay? And then your mind begins to be pulled in two directions. The thinking and the feeling are pulling in opposite direction. Because your rational mind is saying one thing, your emotional mind is saying, I like this pleasant sensation, I hate this painful sensation. It's saying the opposite thing. So when it is pulled in different direction, this is called cognitive dissonance. Feeling, which is part of your affective process, is pulling in one direction. Reasoning or thinking, which is part of your cognitive process, is pulling in the other direction. Now, when you have feeling and thinking pulling in opposite direction, usually which one wins? When you make decision, what are you more inclined to decide on? Are you more inclined to decide based on your feeling? Are you more inclined to make decision based on your thinking and rational thinking? What do you think? Feeling, right? And when feeling and reasoning pull in opposite direction, we experience this cognitive dissonance, we call vichikicha. We invariably react according to feelings. And then, human beings being human, very smart, we justify our emotionally charged decisions with very clever reasoning, giving very clever rational explanations why we decided in a certain way, even though we decided because of the feeling. This is justification. Okay. So there is a scientific explanation why feeling wins. Let's take a look at this explanation of a tug of war between feeling and thinking.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, tug!
And when we try to control them, we start a tug of war between our brain's oldest and newest parts. While ancient structures like the amygdala respond to threats by trying to turn our anger or fear on, it's newer structures, such as the prefrontal cortex, the thinking part of our brain, that try to turn them off. It's the tug of war between these two systems that gives rise to our emotions. At New York University, neuroscientist Joseph Ledoux has studied how the amygdala and the cortex shape our emotional responses. You know more about the amygdala than anybody alive, and you still can't control yours.
No.
Why?
Now, there's an interesting thing, again, that has to do with the wiring of the brain. This is if we could just look at it here. So this is the human brain inside a skull. And the prefrontal cortex is here in the front, right behind your forehead. And that is the newest part of the brain. This is where we make our decisions. This is where we plan for the future and strategize. The lateral prefrontal cortex has no connectivity with the amygdala. The amygdala has superhighways to talk to the cortex, but the prefrontal cortex has only back roads and side streets to get to the amygdala. And therefore, it is unable to tell the amygdala, cool it.
But why are there no connections?
We're in the process of evolving as we speak, and those connections have not been put in yet. This thing was built to do fancy things cognitively, not necessarily to control our emotions.
So what happens is that the emotional brain has very strong connections leading to the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that makes decisions, the part of the brain that is rational. But the prefrontal cortex itself has very weak connections going back to the emotional brain. Which means that when emotional thoughts arise, it actually sabotages your rational thinking. While at the same time, under normal conditions, your rational thinking does not have enough power to overpower the emotional thoughts under normal conditions without proper training. One of the important training in meditation is to train your thinking brain, your prefrontal cortex, so that you are able to become more rational, so that you are able to overpower your emotional urges. Because of the evolution of our brain at this point in time, it is still in the process of evolving. The emotional brain has more power over the rational brain, the thinking brain. Therefore, we need to train our thinking brain, to equip our thinking brain to overcome emotional urges and emotional arousals. Otherwise, we will always react to emotions just like animals do. All animals react to emotions. So, it is really the way we feel that makes us think we have a self. It is this feeling, oh, I'm feeling it, I have a self. So René Descartes was calling this, I think, therefore I am, but actually it is I feel, therefore I am. Very often, all our decisions and actions are governed by our feeling. We take a look at this experience of seeing. The experience arises dependent on the presence of necessary condition. One of the condition is light, reflected from the, let's say seeing a dog, reflected from the dog. Light is the stimulus to our sense organ, the eyeball. So the sense organ, which is the eyeball, that is working. If we are paying attention, we will be able to see the dog. The question is this. In this diagram here, if you look at this lady looking at the dog, what is she seeing? What is she actually experiencing? Is she seeing the dog, or is she seeing light reflected from the dog? The same with you. When you see something, are you seeing the object, or are you seeing light reflected from the object? Take this computer for instance. Are you seeing this computer? If you say you are seeing this computer, what is happening? That means this computer has entered your eyeball. But what are you seeing? You're not seeing this computer. You are seeing light reflected from this computer entering your eyeballs. What is entering your eyeball? Not the computer. What is entering your eyeball is light reflected from the computer. So be aware. This is one of the important points when you practice introspection. Realize that your senses are not picking up objects. Your senses are picking up stimulations. That is all your senses, your sense organs are picking up. Stimulations, not objects. You are not seeing a dog. You're not seeing the computer. You are seeing light reflected from the computer. That's what you're seeing. You are seeing stimulations. Everything is stimulation that we are experiencing. So when the eyeball is stimulated by light reflected from the object entering the eyeball, the process of perception arises, a mental image arises. All we can speak of at this point in time is that there is an experience. And the experience is the sensing of the stimulus. That is all there is. There is this experience of sensing the stimulus and the process of perception arising. That's it. That's all there is. But the mind likes to wander off. The mind likes to take this experience and say, oh, I see a dog out there. So basically it actually treats it, oh, I see this dog out there. And when it does that, the mind does a process called the dichotomy. It breaks this experience into two parts. Two distinct parts which are separated. The subjective part and the objective part. The subjective part is basically what goes on in the mind and the body. The objective part is what is outside the mind and the body. So the subjective part is the atta. The objective part is the loka. There is a world out there. So we end up having this notion, I am a self within a world out there. Okay, I have a self. Because we begin to have this subjective experience and we begin to personalize this subjective experience and say, the body and the experience of the body is the self. That's what we think. And therefore, anything outside the body, that is the world out there. Okay, we will touch on this later on. Maybe this Friday, we will talk a little bit more about how the self arises in the mind. But bear in mind that every time we experience something, there is really only the experience to speak of. But the mind breaks that experience. The affective mind breaks the experience into two parts, the subjective self and the objective world. So what really disturbs the mind? Let's take a look at the process that disturbs the mind. First, we look at craving, or what we call lust, right? That means we sense pleasant sensations. And when we sense pleasant sensations, the emotional mind begins to react, to want more of the pleasant sensations. What is happening inside our mind and our body? There is a biochemical process that happens, that pleasant sensations can actually cause us to want more of it. Let's take a look at what the scientists are saying.
In Seattle, Washington, scientists are attempting to map the exact neural architecture of human sexuality. Dr. Ken Maravilla investigates how lust and sexuality affect each part of the human brain. He uses two technologies. One is the MRI machine. The other technology is a simple DVD player.
Our subjects are presented a stimulus that consists of sexually explicit scenes that promote their ability to become aroused in the magnet.
The experiment is simple. Subjects are shown neutral videos to get a baseline. Then, images become more sexually explicit for several minutes, while Madawela and his staff voyeuristically watch as the subjects' brains change.
We have areas in the frontal lobes that are associated with reward and pleasant feelings, and these become active with arousal. The amygdala often becomes activated, and this is one of the decision-making, evaluative areas of the brain.
The MRI shows that as subjects are sexually aroused, there is an intriguing corollary to the new findings.
We've also found that certain areas of the brain seem to become less active, and they appear to be areas that are related to a moral judgment, of inhibition, if you will.
When the lust areas of the brain light up, the judgment areas of the brain begin to turn off. The conclusion? The more aroused a person, the less access they have to clear judgment. It would seem that science shows a direct connection between lust and poor judgment. The theory supports the basic premise of sociologists studying this area of human behavior.
Sins are good, they're adaptive. Sexual desire is normal and appropriate and healthy. Lust is a term we give when there's too much of it or it's inappropriate.
By this definition, something becomes a sin when it is destructive. It would seem that according to science, it is less a matter of going to hell than going too far.
So judgment is suspended when we are affected by lust. When we become lustful for something, we want more of it, our sense of judgment, our sense of reasoning is suspended or adversely affected. That's how powerful the amygdala is. Now I'm going to show you another one, which is the opposite. Hatred for unpleasant sensations, hatred for things that you don't want, you want to get rid of, and then the mind begins to proliferate, goes into imagination and memory, and starts to have all kinds of thoughts, emotional thoughts, and then you begin to react adversely to these thoughts to get rid of the problem you think is a problem, right?
Today, scientists are beginning to examine exactly where anger comes from.
The brain perceives a lot of information, both from the outside world and from inside the body. And there is one part of the brain called the amygdala that serves the function of sifting through all that information and asking one question. Is this a threat? Is this something I should worry about?
Dr. Ruben Gur has zeroed in on the amygdala as the key instigator of anger. This walnut-sized lobe can quickly overwhelm the brain with uncontrollable rage.
Once there is a perception of danger, there is a cascade of responses in the body that includes changes in heart rate, in blood pressure, in sweating. It makes your body ready to fight or flee.
The amygdala is a primitive part of the brain. It exists because the human brain is made up of layers that were added on top of each other over the millions of years of evolution.
All those other older brains are still alive and well inside your own brain. So you have a part of you that thinks like a dog, and you have a part of you that thinks like a crocodile, and a part of you that thinks like a monkey.
The amygdala creates an automatic fight or flight response to threats. But human beings have evolved another part of the brain, the frontal lobes.
This area that you can see here in the front is the orbital frontal region. And the orbital frontal regions are like brakes for the amygdala. If you can think of the amygdala as being the engine for the threat response, the orbital frontal is the brakes.
If Dr. Gur is correct, then a person who is overwhelmed by anger is literally, temporarily insane, until his amygdala can be controlled. Case in point, the 2003 murder of Betty Dodge by her son James Essick. At the time of the crime, Essick was an adult with mental problems, who had moved in with his mother. Their relationship deteriorated so badly that Dodge asked her son to move out.
And that set him into a panic. And he grabbed a sculpture that they had and broke it on her head and kept hitting her repeatedly until she was dead. And then he went across the street, turned himself into the police.
During the court case, Dr. Gur was hired as an expert witness and asked to evaluate the mental capacity of Essick. He did a complete neuroscan of his brain and found that 30 to 40% of the tissue was missing in the orbital frontal area.
So when the amygdala was saying, I'm in danger, I'm furious, attack, there was not enough tissue in the front to say, calm down. You have better ways of dealing with this situation than attacking what you think is the source of your fear and anger.
The jury agreed with Dr. Gur's testimony and ruled that James Essick was innocent by reason of insanity. He was sent to a mental hospital for treatment. Some might say James Essick was incapable of controlling his ability to sin.
The organ of our mind and what controls our behavior is the brain, and his brain is damaged.
But by the time an angry act results in prison or a mental hospital, the damage is done. Is there a way to treat human rage before it gets to this critical breaking point?
Is there a way to treat human rage? There is. The Buddha has shown the way, and you are now learning and practicing it. Through meditation, we can reinforce the power and function of our prefrontal cortex that allows us to be able to make more rational decisions and able to form our judgment in a more wholesome manner. So every reaction, when we react without realizing it unconsciously, every reaction has a consequence. Okay? And the consequence can be internal or external. In the case of internal consequence, it is the consequence to our body. It gives rise to this general adaptation syndrome, which is called stress. And there are 3 stages: the alarm reaction, stage of resistance, and stage of exhaustion. But the Buddha has already explained this in his own ways. In fact, also it can be categorized in this manner. Alarm reaction is Soka and Parideva, and stage of resistance is Dukkha, the physical pain, and Domanassa, the emotional pain, and stage of exhaustion when people give up and people may even commit suicide, and that is Upayasa, exhaustion or expiration. Okay. So that is the internal consequence, and these are the external consequence in relation to opposite party, in relation to the society in general, in relation to the law of the land, what is legal and not legal to do, in relation to our environment, and finally in relation to matters arising after death, has to do with our rebirth. Okay, so these are the consequences of our reaction. Buddha has basically shown when he first came out of when he first became awakened, he has taught us in the first sermon that there are 2 extremes to be avoided. The unconscious expression of emotions, that is releasing tension in action, right? Submitting ourselves to our sensual pleasures, indulging in these sensual pleasures. And the other extreme is the suppression and repression of emotions, withholding all tensions, bottling it up, devoting to self-torment and self-affliction, which is asceticism. And he practiced asceticism and discovered that was not the solution, but he found a way. It is the middle way, right? So with this middle way, it is to do with the conscious relaxation and tranquility of mind. This is the middle way. So basically what we are practicing with meditation is conscious relaxation and tranquility of mind, to purify the mind. Because in our present circumstances, when faced with the changing vicissitudes of life, if the mind can be kept undisturbed, free from worry, lust and fear, this is the supreme bliss. You can find this in the Mangala Sutta. So with this, I end my presentation.
That was very good, and I hope you understood. But we'll be repeating these things again and again so that you'll understand it better. And so we should thank Billy for doing this and introducing all these things with pictures and various ways. And so that is all for today. So now you can go and continue your meditation till you fall asleep, and then tomorrow morning you wake up again early and you come for the exercises, where I will not be here, but maybe my voice will be here to stand for me, and we have our demonstrator who will demonstrate the exercises for you, and so you do the exercises in the proper way, and we'll meet you after breakfast. And I will just chant a blessing to bless you all, to bring you good health, happiness and success in your meditation. Bhavatu sabba mangalang rakkhantu sabba devata sabba buddhano bhavena sada sutti bhavantu te. Bhavatu sabba mangalang rakkhantu sabba devata sabba dhammanubhavena sada sutti bhavantu te. Bhavatu sabba mangalang rakkhantu sabba devata sabba sanghanubhavena sada sutti bhavantu te.